Welcome back to Astrology Today with Jeff Harman. I am Ella, Jeff's assistant. Great to see you as always. Our topic is, do we, the people, have a voice? Do we have a voice here? It doesn't seem like it sometimes, does it? In terms of the astrology, Jeff is going to tap into a lot of different things, and he's also going to talk a little bit about Rosh Hashanah. So let's get started, Jeff.
All right. Yeah. First thing I want to get into is, just a little bit on what's happening in the world. And, Mercury, of course, has gone direct today, which is the 15th. This was an interesting Mercury retrograde because it also made some very interesting aspects, like a trine to Jupiter, while it was retrograde. And a lot of stuff came out. And of course, we're seeing the deck shuffling here. Of course, in the United States, we've had the issue of, the impeachment inquiry now has come out. They're pushing forward on that. We're seeing, all this dissension with the White House releasing this letter to the media, basically telling them to kind of look the other way and not pay attention to the man behind the curtain. So very interesting stuff, and a lot of stuff brewing globally. And of course, we don't hear much about other parts of the world here in the United States, but there's a lot going on. We had the G20 thing, and of course, a lot of stuff boiling over there with the whole Southeast Asia and China thing. And of course, we've still got Ukraine and Russia going at it over there. So it's a crazy time, and worse yet, we have had more and more reports coming out about the economy. The economy isn't bad. It's in the sewer. The only difference is they're just not acknowledging it on the media. They're basically saying, oh, everything's fine. Just keep pumping gas. Just keep buying groceries on your credit card and do whatever else you got to do. There's nothing to worry about, right? So as they turn the water up to boiling and all the frogs go, wow, it's getting hot in here, So this is, clearly a time, I think, I said this a long time ago, the walls are closing in on Biden. I don't see how this goes any other way than straight down for him. I mean, he's in big trouble. Of course, Hunter Biden got indicted on the gun charges. He'll probably never see a day in jail. He'll get out of it. Daddy will pardon him, or they'll string it out so long. And if he does go to jail, he'll probably be, get all jail free card. He'll be in there for 5 minutes and leave, or they'll give him a trap door in the bottom of the cell, probably, I would think. But whatever happens here, it certainly will be a long, extended process. No question about that. So that's one of the things that's kind of tying into some of the energy that we just saw with Mercury retrograde. And of course, there was a lot of crazy accidents. There always is, always will be, even without Mercury retrograde. People drive like kind of crazy sometimes. Especially if you live here in California, you'll definitely see that. Anyway, so Mercury went direct. Another thing too, as of the 4th of September, of course, this is a little bit farther back, but about 10 days ago, we had Jupiter go retrograde. Now, a lot of people always hear about Mercury retrograde. And of course, we just had Venus go direct on the 3rd, but now we have all the outer planets retrograde. So what does that mean? We have Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto all retrograde. And a lot of people have asked me, say, Jeff, what do you think? Well, I said, this happens all the time. We have to remember the outer planets. So when I say outer planets, this means from Jupiter out. A lot of people include Mars, but it's really from Jupiter out. They all go retrograde several months out of the year. This is every year. It's always been that way. And there are times when they're not retrograde at the same times. And this just happens to be right now where we have all of them retrograde. And of course, they're going to go direct at different times. Jupiter will go direct December 30th. Saturn goes direct November 4th. Uranus goes direct way off in January, and Neptune goes, in the middle of December this year. And of course, Pluto will go direct in October. So nothing to really worry about, but I do find retrograde planets always kind of rehash things. They rework things. And if you do interrogation astrology, they do matter. because we often find when they're retrograde, you're retracing something or reworking something. And of course, that's the ebbs and the flows of life. So very, very common. We've also got some good energies coming up this week. Between now and actually a little longer than this week, the whole week next week is going to have Jupiter in an orb to Mercury trining Jupiter, which is really good. It's very good if you're working on intellectual things, taxes, you're working on book work, you're working on communications. If any of you are writers out there, always love Mercury trine Jupiter. Mercury's the planet of logic, intellectualism, and Jupiter's always expansion. It's the breath of the soul in Nadi astrology. So take advantage of that. This is really a great time to organize things, write outlines, come up with plans, whatever it is that you do. It's a great time to strategize things. And you'll find even working on mechanical things, good time for this. Why? Because Mercury, the planet of logic, communications, and mechanics and communications in general, and transportation, is trining Jupiter. So kind of nice to know. That'll actually be exact on the 25th. And of course, next Friday will be, the 22nd. But good to know. This is a good energy. And of course, you've got the moon constantly making different energies, but this is cool. We're also going to have a little confusing energy that happens really early in the morning on Tuesday. And of course, that's if you're in the Western Hemisphere. And that is the sun is opposing Saturn. And that'll happen on the 19th at about 4:45 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Now, if you're in Australia or Europe, it's going to be different. You have to extrapolate accordingly. And that's always a wonky one. But then right after that, we have the sun trining Pluto on the on Wednesday, Wednesday night at about 8:45 p.m., of course, which is the next day, the 20th. So, good. Decent energies now. Things are beginning to turn. We're going to see a lot of action and motion here in, I think, a more sweeping way. So that's kind of the astrological energies. And again, I think we're going to see a lot more things come out on Biden. I think he's going to end up really going down the sewer here. And to our topic tonight, too, which is, do we, the people, have a voice at all? Again, I go back to the Constitution. I think humanity has never had quite the voice that it's had for the last, 247 years, which was the formation of this country. Now, a lot of people argue with me and say, yeah, but, there's all kinds of injustices in the United States. Yes, there is. But when you weigh it all out, all the checks and balances of living in the United States, we have a lot more rights here than many other people do in the rest of the world, even though there's a lot of, unfairness and political favoritism like we're seeing and have seen forever. But in general, you have basic rights under the Constitution of the Bill of Rights that you don't have other places. And I think, again, this is something to always point out. And another reason why I think at this time, we got to really be aware of how dangerous these times are, because communism and totalitarianism, fascism, whatever you want to say, is always, always lurking on the edge. It's been in every society. It's always been ready to encroach and take away what we have. And again, this country is so unique in that sense. And again, I always encourage people, get a copy of the Constitution. I got it right here. This is an amazing little book. You can get it for, I think $7 or $8. I love this. And the Bill of Rights, it's quite stunning because, there's a lot of injustices, and we see the legal system is so crooked and so many different things go on with it. But overall, this is still the greatest country in the world. And right now, I think we are on the chopping block, and I've been saying this for a lot of podcasts, because of the astrology of the United States. And this relates to something that's really kind of deep here, and I want to go into this. There was just a new moon on Thursday. Now, new moons are very important, and we get them every month. But this one is especially important, and the reason why, it's the new moon closest to the fall equinox. Now, you might say, okay, great, so what? Well, you got to remember, the spring equinox is really, truly the beginning of the year. Then you have and that's of course when the sun, equinox is a Latinized term to mean equal. It's when the days and the nights are exactly equal. So that's the beginning of spring. The birdies are chirping, the flowers are starting to bud, and everything's growing. It's time of growth. And then we go to the summer solstice, which is the peak. And then after that, we get the heat of the summer. And then we get the fall equinox. Well, there's a book that I mentioned on our podcast on the souls that is a really unique book. And it's probably one of the only books I've ever read that has survived the onslaught of the demonic forces on this planet. And it's called The Sacred Magic of Abramelin, the Mage. There's also another more accurate version called The Book of Abramelin. Amazing books. The reason why, this was about a rabbi who lived in the 1400s, and his father was dying on his bed, and he said to him, "My son, I've always heard about the sacred holy magic." Now, this is the same magic that Christians need to realize is exactly what Christ was believed to have had. We hear the story. Oh, he went in the desert, right? 40 days, the devil tempted him. And then he said no, and then the devil became his slave. Well, how about that? So us sitting in the modern world, this is like, what? This is like, we're all sitting in front of our computers. We're all sitting in front of our iPhones, right? Day and night, or our droids. And we're in a technological mind control world. We really are. And it's becoming more and more and more so. And this is why you see more medications, more insanity, more dependency on technology. And it's really hard to keep ourselves level and sane. Well, this book, I'm going to go back to that. So Rabbi Maharil was his name, and his father was dying, and he told him about this. So he set out to go find, and I don't want to go through the whole book because you can get the book and you can read it. It's pretty interesting. So you can get it on Amazon or wherever you want, some good translations. And essentially, I'm going to paraphrase and shorten this up, but essentially the book was a story how he went to perceive about the sacred holy magic, the right of humanity to have dominance over evil. Now, this is an interesting story because he went, and it's an amazing book. He went to all these different rabbis and charlatans and people who were practicing magic, and he found they were all just charlatans. They were all crazy. The spirits tricked them, right? So then he heads down to Palestine and Egypt, and you got to remember, this is the 1400s. Okay, you don't have American Airlines or Alaskan Air or any of these other things. You're hoofing it down there, and so he walked all the way down to Palestine, which back then was pretty much the whole Middle East. There was no Iraq, Iran, and Syria and all. There was provinces, but not like it was after World War I. There was Egypt, the Holy Land, and Palestine. So he hoofed it all around there for a long, long time. And to make the story kind of end here, he was at a bathhouse in a place called Akari, Egypt. Right, not too far from the pyramids, a ways, but not too far. And it's in the book. You can read it. And he had passed through there a few years before, and he was now making his way back home, and he was totally distraught. And he was basically sobbing to the innkeeper and said, I think God's forsaken me. He says, I don't think this exists. He said, there's no way this could ever exist. I think it's, just a fairy tale. And the man at the inn said, I think I know a man you seek. And he said, I'll get you a guide tomorrow. And he said his voice almost sounded angelic. And after years of pursuing this, the next day, this Aaron was the man's name in the inn. Aaron got him a guide. And of course, this ended up being Rabbi Maharil, which, by the way, you guys can find in the book. He actually has his grave in the city of Worms, actually, which, by the way, is where the trials for heresy for Luther went on, the Lutheran religion, all this stuff that went on in the city of Worms, Germany. And we did a little special on this. Anyways, to bring this to closure and get back to the topic of this, he ends up going for like 2 to 3 days on white sand in the Egyptian desert, and ends up meeting this man, Abramelin, who knew all about his father, who knew all about why he was there, and knew his name, everything, spoke the Chaldean language. And he ends up staying. Abraham was the Rabbi Maharil's name. You'll read it in the book if you read it. And he essentially taught him that you purify the soul Oh, you actually start at the spring equinox and you go for a full year. And then the final 6 months is the spring equinox to the fall equinox. So Judaism actually celebrates something that's really interesting and very ancient and very sacred. And that is this. Rosh Hashanah actually begins on sundown on the 15th, which is the day, that's of course the Sabbath, the day after the new moon. And that's a celebration that once the soul was purified, the guardian angel would appear to you. And for that 7 days, they would teach you how to control the fourth hierarchy. The fourth hierarchy isn't just the devil. It's Lucifer, Satan, Belial, and Leviathan. And astounding book. And by the way, he changed the course of history. He actually raised someone from the dead where they weren't allowed to have the soul maintained to the body, but the lower nefesh and spirit was there. And he was allowed to do that by the angels so that the course of history wouldn't change. It's all in the book. It's amazing. I've actually looked up some of the history of this, and it's true. It's pretty wild. Again, history spotted, and it's not totally accurate, but it does seem to check that the things he said he did to change the course of history in the, Middle Ages, which of course would have been in the 14th century. And that all happened. So, and many people who are familiar with this book will know that, soon afterwards, all this alchemy came out, John Dee with Queen Elizabeth and all these different things that happened, which we won't get into. But where am I going with all this? Well, now we go into our modern society. And what's interesting about this is, again, we are all programmed with the lower conscious mind. And again, I refer to that diagram, the nefesh. The nefesh is the Hebrew Aramaic term, meaning the lower conscious mind, right? We're spanked on the rear end. We are completely knocked out. We cannot really know anything. And again, we had mentioned IQ tests and all this societal, programming about get a good job with more pay and you're okay, right? I think there was a song about that by Pink Floyd. But anyhow, the bottom line is it's important to have our material world and our security, but what's not been taught is who the hell are we? We are spiritual beings having a physical experience. And I can tell you, not a single one of us will get out of here with one thing we own. It's not going to happen. So, it's great to leave it to your loved ones, your family, your friends, whatever you want to do with your will, but you ain't taking nothing, and neither am I, and except the conscious awareness we gain. And what's interesting about this book is now we might see a little bit more what's going on in this world and why evil seeks to suppress human consciousness, why there's so many wars, why there's this control with money, this fear of money. And when you read this book, if you ever read it, you'll be stunned to read inside of there that you actually have a dowry. Every human being is allotted a certain amount of wealth that's free. And this stuff sounds totally off the wall to modern society because we all got our social security numbers, right? Pretty soon we're going to have a barcode right here, or it might be here. I don't know, wherever they put it. Maybe they'll inject us with the next vaccine. But the bottom line is we're all in a mind-controlled society. And not that society doesn't have its good and valuable things to it. I mean, I don't know about you, but I kind of like taking a vehicle to the grocery store and having, goods from all over the world sitting on a shelf that I can buy and put on my table. It's kind of nice, And so we have a lot of valuable things in modern society that I wouldn't negate. But on the other hand, if you ever study that book, you'll see that maybe modern society is nowhere near as good as the original plan that God had for us, or that the human beings have a sacred right to. Many of the Christians will read Sermon on the Mount with a completely different viewpoint once you understand this book. So it's really a stunning book. And I want to point out that, the astrology always seems to show when these marker points come. And we had something, I've mentioned this many times, on literally on the first of the year, right after the first of the year of January of 2020, everybody remembers that one, we had COVID. and you could feel it. It wasn't just COVID. You could feel the energy. It was eerie. The streets were not only barren, but you could feel it. We had a Kalasarpa yoga. All the planets were in between the moon's eclipse points. Further, we had the planet Saturn joining Pluto. And that was in the tropical zodiac. And this was powerful. And it not only brought in COVID, which I personally think had a lot of help. I'll just say that. That was planned. I really believe that, because when you look at 9/11, you look at the banks crashing, you look at these things, the owners at the top of the pyramid are very aware of these cycles of astrology. And many people have said, some of these people aren't human. They're evil. They look like lizards. They shapeshift. They do this. They do that. Well, isn't that interesting? The rabbit hole might just go a lot deeper than we know. And the interesting thing is these people seem to be exceedingly aware of these portals of energies that happen. Because I really believe the planets are like portals. They're energetic portals that line up, and when you study astrology, there's all this complex, heady stuff about signs and planets and squares and aspects and all this stuff, which is true. But when you back it out to 100,000 feet, you start realizing these are just energetic patterns that line up. So it's like tumblers on a safe. When they line up, things open, you see? And this is what's interesting. We are right now in what I would call a contraction period from what happened in 2020. And moreover, I've mentioned we had a 240-year Saturn-Jupiter conjunction, which is ushering in an extremely high-tech age. I mean, we're going to be blown away at how high-tech this world gets in genetics, microprocessors, advanced technology, scalar stuff. I mean, it's going to be off the charts. It's going to be like the Jetsons. It's already getting there. They're just in the contraction phase right now of trying to rearrange the financial systems. And I personally think they're trying to crash them. This is engineered, this whole thing with shutting down the energy, causing the chaos, flooding the borders, flooding the, strategic points in government control positions, which we call politics, right? And it's very engineered. We're seeing this globally. And do we have a voice? I think if people realize how powerful we are, we would realize this is really evil versus good. And it always seems like evil has an edge over good, and this is something that's really brewing right now. And I think the astrology that's coming up in the United States and this whole thing with Biden, I really think it's the owners at the top of the pyramid put him in there. And where we're going, the United States is going to be a key pivotal point to whether we see this country maintain its constitution without all this complex legal short circuiting that's going on and has been going on. And I think the exposure that's going on is going to go far deeper than just Biden. And you can see, call them the deep state, call them the swamp, call them whatever you want. They're all covering for each other. They don't want this exposed. Even Hillary was in the White House. That's interesting, huh? So I call her Hillary, not Hillary. But very interesting stuff that's happening right now. And this, again, might not sound relatable, but it actually is if we wake up and see that we have a divine right to be superior over evil. And that's exactly what that book, The Sacred Magic of Abramelin, or you could say the Book of Abramelin is probably the better one. Very interesting information in there. And this is why we've seen the ebbs and the flows of free energy and advanced society that's been secreted and hidden, and then it gets quashed again. And the evil spirits love war. And we're in a very dangerous time right now because of the sophistication of everything. And this relates again to maybe why we're seeing so much extraterrestrial, which also could be partially angelic and partially demonic forces showing up. You have to remember our reality is very, very blocked from what I think is really going on in what they call the astral planes. And this planet seems to be far more divine than we give it credit for. It seems to be truly a sacred place where spirit becomes manifest. Any of you women out there who's had children, or you men that have had fathered a child and watch that, you see how sacred life is. Or just watch an animal be born. It's really quite amazing. It is where spirit manifests. Wouldn't you agree, Ella?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And when you ask the question, do we the people have a voice? I feel like we need to connect to the divine voice. And I think that is what will allow the good to conquer the evil.
Yeah. And that's for sure. And I'll tell you something too. I'm in Act 3. Many of you out there may have heard me mention, I think life is like a 3-act stage play. Act 1 is when we're born to the first Saturn return. And then from the first, which is 28 to 29, and then 28 to 29 to about 58 to 59 is the end of Act 2. And then you go into Act 3 until you're in your mid 80s. And when you get Act 3, you start to realize, wow, this is all just an experience. And, you begin to realize, your hormones aren't bouncing off the wall anymore. They're swirling down the drain, right? You got to take care of your health a little more and be more aware. But what's interesting about all of this is you start realizing and become much more focused on who the heck are we and what is this place? I think we're entering a time where this conscious awareness is critical, because if we do not realize, astrology is the modulation on the soul, but we're outside of astrology when you look at the soul and the upper portions of the spirit, and we are. The lower conscious mind is where the astrology acts. And I think the more we realize that, the more we realize that's the terrain, but it's not us, you see. We're the journeyer. We're not the journey. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, the experiencer, right? We're the experiencer.
We're the experiencer. That's right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, awesome. Awesome. Well, we do have a voice. We all have that divine voice within us.
Much more so than we know.
Much more so than we know.
Much more so than we know. And again, I always mention the book, The Magus of Strovolos. And this is really important because in that book, he mentions that when people pass away, when they exit, no matter what age, the conscious awareness that they have at the time that they exit the body. I always loved the movie Ghost. Remember when Patrick Swayze was shot and he realizes, oh my God, I'm not in my body. And he's watching himself and, Molly Hold'em and all that on the street of New York at night. And then he spends up, a bunch of time finding out, that he was murdered for a bank account, thing over money, right? It's always money, right? And then he ends up at the end of the movie, saving Molly and of course Whoopi Goldberg's character. But anyhow, the point is that, and then he moves on into the light, So what I'm going with all this is that Daskalos in the Magus of Strovolos says that the conscious awareness that you exit this body with literally creates the psychonoetic pathways that you move into the astral planes. And I think the religions have failed a little bit in this sense. Not all of them, but a lot of them have. And that is that literally the more you are aware of where you're going and how you're going, the more you may create a more divine straight path out of here. And many of the yogis in India and the Egyptians were aware of this. It seems like some of them weren't too, but really interesting areas of discussion, to say.
Well, that just proves that we should always be aware and conscious at every moment, because we never know when we're going to go. We never know when we're going to.
You can get pretty good ideas with Nadi astrology.
If you look at it, though.
If you look at it, right.
A lot of people don't look at it. A lot of people might not want to look at it.
Yeah, I don't like to unless I'm directly asked, but you can certainly. I just had a friend of mine, dear friend, die. He was just 80 years old. And really, went kind of in a hard way. He really had kidney failure and all kinds of stuff. And it was exactly as the Nadi astrology would say. And my friend and I were talking the other night, and, I showed him the chart. I said, I don't know that he would have survived this had he not taken extreme measures, So sometimes it's just that way, that there's clearly, they say the angel shows up that tied you into the body and takes you away. So there's something very sacred about these lives. Even though we all live lives of quiet desperation, it's not an easy thing, to be on this planet. I really think this world is a place of purification and rectification of the lower conscious awareness. And we seem to keep coming to this barbecue until we realize that. And then we move on, and many ascended masters like to come back and help people to move on. Because I see this, so many people are so rooted in what they believe and their reality structures that they aren't looking outside of that. And this is where they say reincarnation just keeps happening until that, you could say, veil starts to separate between the lower conscious mind and the upper portions of the soul. So it seems to be a very divine process, no question about that.
Yeah. And what do you think about if someone really wants that? If somebody really, really desperately wants that, that really does play a part in it, right? And that it must show up in the astrology.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up. Yes, because see, this is how they would know when a sacred person was born. In Nadi astrology, right off the bat, if you see the Jupiter and the nodes, particularly K2 join with Jupiter, that is one indication right there. This is an advanced soul that they've reincarnated many times. You bet. All the configurations and yogas in the chart show much about where that soul is in their evolutionary growth. No question about that. It's very interesting stuff. And you can see, what the likelihood of your parents were, your mother, the grandparents. You could see all kinds of very interesting things, and also releasements of karmic energies, both good and ill, as you go through. I've had so many people say, "Oh my God, this tragedy happened to me," and I go, "Was it right here?" "Oh my God, how'd you know?" Well, because the progressions. See, the birth chart is not us; it is a imprint of where the soul might be right now in what we call time. There is no time. You think about it, there's no time. Once you get off of the celestial cycles of this earth, what is time? Time doesn't exist. And on the astral plane, they actually talk about that the cycles are actually reversed. Full moons are new or full. It's really interesting. And that's when you're close to the earth plane. There's all kinds of fascinating looks into this stuff. And it's far beyond what any of us will ever fully know. But I think we all will know that when we connect up to the higher levels of the soul. And again, that diagram that shows the nefesh, the ruach or rosh, however you want to say it, the spirit, and the neshama, and then the upper portions of the soul, which is a simplistic diagram, but it seems to be very accurate in terms of where we go. And there seems to be portions of the soul that have to be reincarnated where other fragments of the soul join and move on. So it's very deep stuff. And some of this stuff was talked about on our podcast on the soul, where I had mentioned Rabbi Fatea mentions this, the Sharia Gilgum, the Magus of Strovolos, elegant on this stuff. Also, the Vedantic scriptures are very interesting on this, the Puranas and the Upanishads. It's veiled, but it's there. I think the Magus of Strovolos and the Sharia Gilgum and also the Rabbi Fatea's work is much more lucid. Also, I always include some of the wonderful works like by Dr. Carl Wickland, the 30 Years Among the Dead, an incredible journey of a psychiatrist turned from a scientist to a total spiritualist and realized that nobody dies. We're all sojourners here having a physical experience. And evil and our voice and our power, I think there will come a time as the solar system progresses through the yugas, and those are called time lords that are used in Vedic astrology. And it's very hard to understand them because there's many different viewpoints. There's an old saying, God confused the astrologers. And I think that's true. Just like he can write a lot of languages, right? So there's a lot of stuff here going on that is not as lucid as it used to be, but clearly it seems as our solar system makes its way around this 25,000, almost 26,000 year journey, that there are periods of divine light that come through the heavens. Some people say we're in a dark rift right now, which is a rift of, you could say, obscurity in materialism that we're about to come out of. And there's a lot of speculation when that is. Many people have said, oh, it's 2012, it's this, it's that. I don't claim to know, but I do say I think it could be very close to when the Hebrew calendar runs out, which is going to be in the Hebrew calendar, right when it hits 6,000. And for people using the daily calendar we all use, it's probably going to be right around 200 something years from now. That's when it'll be. And, I was looking into this. I went back and I was looking at, when the Federal Reserve Act and World War I, that was a big trigger point. That was a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. That's exactly what happened, just like with COVID, a little different cycle. Again, we see Nixon took us off the gold standard, the Vietnam War, and of course, World War II was another one that was also right on a Saturn-Pluto square. So all these things really seem to show up. And the United States itself, again, I mentioned we're going to definitely be talking about this in upcoming podcasts, where there is some serious things going on with the United States. I tend to think this is really going to be a dramatic experience, but we just might be the phoenix coming out of the ashes. There might be more positivity when this is all said and done, because the criminals don't want to get caught. And when they do get caught, I think the hammer's coming down. Look at the French Revolution. And throughout history, no matter how tumultuous it always got, good in society and the evolution of society always won. Even though there was a lot of trouble, a lot of death, a lot of, horrible things, divinity always wins. Creation will always prevail over evil.
Yeah.
It's the source.
It's the source. It's the source. Everything comes out of the source, and the source never ends. So, yeah.
It doesn't seem like it.
I don't think so.
Right. It doesn't seem like it, but it does. It always ends up, because we look at our myopic lives, but if you look at the evolution of creation, it's always ascending upwards. Always. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much for this. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, for watching. Take good care of yourselves. Tap into your inner voice, that precious divine voice. And we'll see you next time on Astrology Today with Jeff Harman.